Welcome to the top 10 games I played this year. I have not scripted a video for this channel yet, and I am interested in doing some more long prep videos for the channel, primarily centered around the idea of review. I play a lot of games. I enjoy articulating my experience with games, and so I thought I would give this a shot as a pseudo-scripted, pseudo-review video to give you my top 10 list for all of the video games that I played that were new to me this year. New to me, so most of these actually did not come out in 2024, and only new to me in the last year. I relied on my Steam recap in part, as well as my own personal spreadsheet where I track my games I've played and my experience with those games to come up with this list. And I'm excited to share it with you. I think I have some very good games on the list, and if you like any of the games that you've seen me play, then these can be considered excellent recommendations for you. Before we get into it too far, I do want to point out the honorable mention here in the background of our title slide. I played Fires of Rubicon for the first time this year. This is Armored Core 6, FromSoft mech game, and I played it for the first time during the summer, but did not finish it. I intend to finish it, but it is a massive game in its file size, which means that at some point I had to uninstall it to be able to do any other number of games on my computer. And so it's a tricky situation where if you want to take a break from a game that's such a massive file size, you kind of have to take a long break, or otherwise just accept that you're going to have to uninstall and reinstall this huge game maybe more than once, which is fine. I just decided not to do that, so I haven't finished it, even though it's been about 6 months since I played it. I intend to finish it, but it will not be in my rankings. I suspect that it would have been in my top 10 if I had finished. But let's get into the good stuff. Number 10, new to me this year, Against the Storm. I had heard of Against the Storm before, but had never seen any gameplay of it. One of my favorite Slay the Spire streamers, Baylor Lord, played Against the Storm from time to time when he wasn't playing Slay the Spire, but I had never stuck around to watch any of the gameplay of it, and so I finally decided to download it. It was on sale, I think, probably, and I gave it a try, and I quite enjoyed it. It is a strategy roguelike game, and it was good. It was good. For each of these I have a pro, a con, some pros, some cons, and then my personal ranking among all games I've played. So these rankings are not, obviously they're ranked 10 to 1 for the list of games that I played this year that were new to me, so this is number 10. But I also thought I would give you an idea of where they hold up against every game I've played ever. And I mean ever. I actually have my spreadsheet out to like 150 games or so now. I can actually take a look real quick. Technically I have 170 games on this list, although I've only bothered to rank about 80 of them. So this is in the top half of all games I've played, though among all the games I've ranked, I guess it's not technically in the top half. It's number 49. What I liked about this game, it was mechanically simple, but strategically complex. What I mean by that is that the design of the strategy was not overwhelming to learn and pretty intuitive to build on. But as they built on it, the small decisions about which types of species that you were building a civilization for and what resources were available on maps and stuff gave a pretty diverse gameplay loop that made me feel like my decisions were consistently interesting. I was going really full steam ahead on this game. I enjoyed it. I would lose sometimes, but it didn't feel disheartening. And then something just flipped where suddenly I was no longer compelled to continue to grind it. I do want to return to it. There is a pretty long progression to the game that I am still just beginning, which I remember feeling very excited to progress to completion on. But we'll see if I get the enthusiasm for it again. I feel that part of the reason I ran out of steam all of a sudden was the game was striking a difficult balance for me of being difficult enough that it was engaging. I generally like playing difficult games. So I would lose sometimes, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's mostly a good thing, but in that sense it is a stressful game. That on its own I don't think is inherently a con, but when you combine that with this other one, these two kind of work together, right? It's too stressful and too relaxing. I felt that the pace of the game was slow considering how difficult it felt. It's technically a real-time strategy game, but they let you pause, and I think that actually kind of builds to this discomfort between stress and relaxation where to account for my stress, I feel like I need to pause very frequently and check and micromanage very little things in the village, which starts to become tedious and not fun. But also, because I'm feeling compelled to pause so often, the games start to drag on, they take a long time, and so I start to get bored and complacent in these long runs that can take. Early on, they took between 30 and 40 minutes. Eventually, they started taking more than an hour, up to an hour and a half. And I would just kind of lose patience with it, even though at the same time I was stressed out about all of the little decisions I was having to make. So it was both too many things to check at once, as well as not enough happening for me to continue to feel excited within any single run. A little bit weird, because I think both of those things are benefits on their own, and together they put me in this discomfort that made me drop the game, and I haven't gone back to it since. I played this for a while in August. Number 9, and I'm going to be switching music in the background from game to game. I would like to give you a little teaser of the music to see if you can predict which game comes next. But this is Helldivers 2. I don't remember how I heard of this game. It's a cooperative game. I think that a friend just said, hey, have you heard of it? You should download it so we can play it together, and I did. I played this a good deal over the summer. Probably the best part about this game is it's extremely cinematic. It's over the top in the best way possible. It's goofy and militaristic, explosive, and just a lot of fun for all of those reasons. And while it was recommended to me as by a friend, the co-op actually ended up being the main pull to the game. There's kind of like this sense of community objectives that they give you. I don't know if I was particularly captivated by that, but just the idea of getting together with friends to complete extremely difficult challenges in general was pretty rewarding. I enjoyed that. The cons are that it is very repetitive. Once you have played through some of the same mission objectives, and I feel like this audio is a little too loud. Adjust this down a little bit. I spent a long time trying to balance my audio levels before I started recording, so I do apologize if any of the music that I've queued up is too loud or too quiet. It's a little tricky thing to get right when I have a bunch of different tabs open trying to capture some of the music from each of the games. Anyway, cons, it's repetitive. So once you've made it through all of the difficulties and all of the mission types, it felt like there was nothing else the game had to offer me. For a game that is designed for you to do some of the same types of things over and over and continue to get excited by it, I just did not continue to get excited by it. Oh no, it's an ad. That's annoying. Hopefully that wasn't too distracting. But yeah, the game didn't have enough to offer me to make it past number 9, but a great game. I liked it. It made it into my top 10 games I played this year. Also, just to give you a point of reference, Steam says I played 26 new games this year. I think it's slightly less than that because some of those were like new on Steam, but I had played it, or some of them were like games I didn't play for very long. I just like downloaded it, booted it up, and was like, oh, this isn't something I want to play, and so I didn't really count it as a game that I played enough up to rank. So to give you an idea, these top 10 are about the top half of games I played this year, probably. It's a good estimate. So even though I think ultimately this game didn't excite me in the long run, it is still quite good that it made it into this top 10 list at all. As far as every game I've played overall, it's about 43. This is a third-person shooter. Among the mechanics of some of my other favorite shooters like Halo, Apex Legends, I've recently been playing Marvel Rivals, I don't think it's really as good as those as a shooter. But like I said, the cinematic element and the co-op element were uniquely excellent for this game. So definitely worth checking out if you're into shooters. Co-op games. The next game on my list is a roguelike. I thought about showing you the little web map that Steam does of all the different genres you've played, but definitely roguelikes are my number 1 genre, I would say. Number 1 enjoyed, number 1 played this year anyway. So the next game is a deck building roguelike called Cobalt Core, kind of a unassuming game. Where did I hear about this game for the first time? I think it was just from a friend recommendation again. And what an adorable game. It's beautiful, first of all. I loved the music. I loved the art. There's this pixel art going on, but also just like really, really cute, satisfying to look at. I loved being in the interface of the game. Intuitively unique. So among deck building roguelikes, one of the standards to always compare to is Slay the Spire. If you've watched my channel, you know that I'm a big fan of Slay the Spire. I think it's the best far and away. And so comparing to Slay the Spire, you don't want to be too much copying Slay the Spire, but you also don't want to abandon all the good things they did. And I think this game accomplished that middle ground pretty well. The combat is based on a positional system that was extremely intuitive. It was very satisfying to move your ship around and evade enemy attacks, but also very unique. It was a movement system that worked with the deck building element in a way that I hadn't really thought of before. I hadn't really seen anyone else think of before, so I liked it a lot. I will also make the Into the Breach comparison, another positional strategy roguelike. I played Into the Breach for the first time this year as well. It's not on this list. It's actually in it's either my least favorite or second least favorite game I played this year. The spatial reasoning involved in Into the Breach was overwhelming, stressful, anxiety-inducing, and I hated it. And I can't say why other than to make the comparison to Cobalt Core and at least acknowledge the fact that it's not a positional strategy aversion I have in general, because the positional strategy they incorporated in this game just blew me away. It was astounding. It was perfect. And for whatever reason, the way they did it Into the Breach was not that way. So that kind of gives Cobalt Core a little bit of extra kudos, because certainly it's not a given that their spatial positioning combat strategy was going to be attractive to me. The cons were that it didn't have as much to offer as, again, comparison, Slay the Spire. The best balanced deck building card game, gives itself replayability by virtue of how well balanced it is, and I think Cobalt Core just was not. The starter deck was a little bit too easy to tune up, and so I didn't feel as engaged by the random roguelike elements where I had to make do with what the game was offering me every run. Instead, I felt like I had kind of solved the game after I got my dozen or so hours into it, where I understood the strategies that you needed to employ to win on the hardest difficulty. And the narrative wasn't enough to really compel me to the finish either. I think technically I started playing this game at the end of last year, but I certainly finished it this year, so I put it on the list for my 2024 plays. It's in my top 40 games of all time. It ranks number 39. I liked it a lot. The next game on my list is also a cute, artistic game with great music, great visual design, although it is to be expected because it is from a much bigger studio. While Cobalt Core was small, indie, independent, Nintendo released Kirby in the Forgotten Land, I think 2 years ago. I played it for the first time this year. I think I got it for Christmas last year, so a year ago. Started playing it cooperatively. It was very important to me that this game was accessible because of the co-op team that I was playing with. I say team, it's a two-player game. But the two-player co-op was great, and the accessibility was perfect for what I was looking for. So I think this game ranks unusually high because of the niche that it filled in my gaming habits. I think certainly if I was playing it on my own for myself, it would not have necessarily ranked above Cobalt Core or others, but the accessibility was perhaps the most important thing I was looking for, and it delivered in a big way. On top of that, I was also impressed with how much the game had to offer. For a game that was really easy and very simple, it did not really miss a beat on the different spins they had for the Kirby costumes and the worlds that you went to. Very, very well done. The downsides are that it's easy, so this, while accessibility was like important to me, I think also it's still worth being critical of a game whose design is based on pressing A and B as often as you want, in any order you want, or as infrequently as you want, that will still just sail you on to the end of the game. In that way, it's more of a passive experience than an active experience, which games are excellent in my opinion because of the degree to which they give you an active experience. So that certainly had to be a downside, despite accessibility certainly being an important thing to me. I don't know how a game could be extremely accessible so that someone who was terrible at video games could still play it and succeed at it and not be frustrated, but also not be a mindless button masher. I don't know if that balance exists, and so maybe it's unfair for me to say that accessibility is a pro while button mashing is a con, because there's no way to strike a balance between the two of those. But nevertheless, that's what I've chosen to do with this game. And again, there's this unique ranking because if I was playing it just for myself, the accessibility wouldn't really be important. Similar to the button mashing con, I just put trite. Just simply, it wasn't extremely fresh. If you have played action platform adventure games before, from the last 20 years even, there was nothing really innovative about what they did here. Like I said, I liked the content density. They had fun worlds and they had fun costumes, but none of them really wowed me compared to any similar game I would have played even 20 years ago. Now obviously this is an improvement on probably some old classic Kirby games. I never played any classic Kirby games, but like, I don't know, like classic Mario games, like Super Mario Galaxy, I think kind of fits the same niche where you go to different worlds and you have some action platformy stuff and some secrets to find. Super Mario Galaxy came out, 15 years earlier than Kirby, and really Kirby doesn't bring anything better to the table than Super Mario Galaxy does. Again, that's a little bit of an unfair comparison. If you don't know, Super Mario Galaxy is in my top 10 video games of all time. Number 10, actually. But I think it's a comparison worth making, that a game like this that's coming out in 2022, like if it's not going to innovate, is not going to be a groundbreaker. Ultimately, this game ended up being in my top, ended up being ranked 33. Pretty good, but not in the top 30. Not my top 25. Top 25 is kind of a special threshold for me because of the new games that I get gifted every year. There has often been an invested interest on people who gift me these games as to whether or not I'm going to like them well enough that they end up in the top 10. Since I've been being gifted games for long enough, I've expanded that to the top 25. So any game that I play that is gifted to me that makes it to the top 25 is considered like a huge success. Like it overcame the hurdle of becoming better than most of the other games I've ever played before. And this does not fall in that category. Top 33. Great game. Important niche to fill in its accessibility, but ultimately not a masterpiece. If you have watched any of the content on my channel, you probably recognize the music from the next game. And hopefully you were a fan of the Balatro content that I gave you in the first half of the year. Balatro was my #1 most played game this year. I played a lot of this game, and that's mostly because of the content I decided to make for this channel. It was very, very easy for me to capture all of my gameplay of Balatro on YouTube. Most games that I play that I get excited about are difficult for me to both be excited about and experience for the excitement for myself, but also make a video for. I don't know if I have a good explanation as to why. I like making videos, but I feel like it's just a tad more satisfying to experience a game just for me when it's an adventure game or a story game. I think the need to articulate out loud my decisions, the content the game is sharing with me, just detracts from my experience some amount. And with Balatro, there is no story, there is no exploration, and a single run of Balatro is the perfect length of time to be able to think every decision out loud and still be able to not be exhausted by the time I'm done with the run. I love Slay the Spire, but the runs are so long that if you're articulating every decision out loud, you're just way more exhausted by the end of the run. The pros of this game were kind of hard to articulate, you can see here. I think strategically it was great. This is a roguelike deck builder, kind of. And I thought the strategy was just good. It was simple, it was fun. There's nothing more to say about it than that. It was simple and fun. I liked it. Good job. But there's this other element of what made this game great that I think has to do with just like dopamine triggering effects, is what I heard one content creator describe it when Balatro was still very new at the beginning of the year. They said the number of dopamine triggering effects in this game are off the charts, basically. And I think that's accurate. I put here number go burr, just the chimes and the visual bells and whistles really do wrap you in a casino way. I think there's kind of this thematic flavor to them pulling that off in a way that worked for me anyway. I think the mobile gotcha, spin the wheel excitement thing is usually one of the most horrific things you can do to your game, but because in Balatro it was not to an end of monetization, but instead of an end to, I don't know, just like get you to play poker in a roguelike slot machine-y way, where it's a little bit of a roll of the dice of the jokers that you get and the hands that you draw. I think it just worked. So those were all pros. The downsides are that it's artistically simple, and I mean that both in the visual and audio presentation. This song I am not a fan of. It's very repetitive. That's actually not the same repetitive con that you see here in the second bullet point. I'll get to that in a moment. I just mean the art, the music is simple and repetitive. The artwork is, I think, good for what they were going for, but pixel art is not generally impressive to me, and it's a pretty small game, so it's not like there's huge worlds that they drew or anything like that. They just have like some jokers they designed up. I don't know. It's definitely a limiting factor for any game, that if you don't give yourself a field of world building to work with, or orchestral pieces to work with, you're gonna lose some of the greatest things of some of the greatest games I've ever played. And that's fine, it just means that it is a downside. It is gonna limit how good your game can be. It's incredible that Balatro overcame that simplicity and still made it to be my top 30 games of all time, number 29. The other con here about repetitiveness is referring specifically to the gameplay. Once you climb the difficulties, you do need to have an understanding of the game enough that I don't feel like there is a lot left to mix up your strategy and approach to a given run. Certainly you have to play the hand that's dealt to you, no pun intended, but I don't think that it gives itself a lot of longevity for a roguelike that is really effective to the degree that it's replayable. And so once the roguelike hits that repetitive wall, you have to ask yourself the question, oh no, another ad. Sorry. But once a roguelike hits that repetitive wall, you have to ask yourself the question, like, did it fulfill its explorative journey before I became bored with it? And I think with Balatro, it was close to that threshold, but ultimately probably could have been less repetitive in the strategies that I felt like it was forcing me to consider. I don't know if you could build the same game and actually overcome that con, but it is what it is. I think that's kind of a theme to these pros and cons, is that a lot of the downsides are not downsides or in the sense that they are critiques, where I'm musing on what the developers could have done better or should have done better. Rather, they're just downsides that often are just part of the nature of the upside and need to be considered fairly with the upside when ranking and evaluating and rating and all of that. But don't necessarily mean that the developers made some glaring mistakes or did worse than games that don't have those same downsides. Just different games for different niches is what it is. This music I think is a little bit too loud as well. The next game, maybe you can tell, is Hogwarts Legacy. Big AAA game here compared to Balatro. You see there's a good mix of huge AAA games and also indie games, which I think is fun. I like that both of those can be excellent, in not just in their own ways, but in some of the same ways. I think a AAA game can build the beautifully satisfying art and world building, kind of, again, niche services for a gamer as an indie game can. Whereas an indie game can also build you the huge, expansive execution on great designed mechanics. And I feel like sometimes there's this idea that if a AAA game is great, it's because they had most money to spend on the best graphics and capitalized on really clear, big ticket mechanics. And that if an indie game is good, it's because they capitalized on like these really good, nice hand-drawn artworks and being extremely unique. I think of a game like Hollow Knight or Celeste, also both games in my top 10. It's still a little bit loud. Turned it down a little bit more. Hollow Knight and Celeste, where a lot of it is like, oh, the cute artwork or the unique platforming that made it great, because that's what indie games do. I think in reality, something that this list has shown me, and hopefully this list also proves to a lot of you who are watching, is that indie games can be great at anything that they want to, and AAA games can be great at anything they want to. And they don't necessarily have to fall for the same weaknesses as other indie games or AAA games. So for Hogwarts Legacy specifically, the pros, and this is the biggest pro for the game, and in fact an advantage that this game has more than any other game I've probably ever played, is an immersive world. The design of the landscape and the castle, as well as, yes, the huge commitment to high fidelity graphics, was unbelievable. It was absolutely unbelievable. The ability to just hop on your broomstick and explore the land was something that no other game has really approached for me in the same way. I thought it was super great. The other pro here I put nostalgic, maybe not in the way that a lot of people would think. Certainly, I don't share the same love for the Harry Potter universe that big Potterheads do, which is fine. The nostalgia here is not so much, I think, Hogwarts or Harry Potter. It's just innately an excellent IP, but rather, when I was a kid, growing up with games, and you don't necessarily choose your games, you just have video games that your parents get you on your Xbox between the ages of like 6 and 10. The best video games I played during that age of nostalgia for video games, that was right my coming of age era for being a gamer, and the very best games available on the Xbox in that time period were old school adventure games based off of movies like Harry Potter. So I had a Harry Potter 3 Prisoner of Azkaban video game on the Xbox that was just great. It's a fantastic game. I don't know if it would hold up today. I haven't played it in a long time. But it was one of the best games I had at the time, or so I remember. And so there's a lot of nostalgia for a modern, high fidelity, again, AAA video game, to just make another Harry Potter adventure game and make it just 20 times better than any of the old games that were on old video game consoles in the early 2000s. And I think that's a really big pro. I think it's great to just take things that people have liked in the past and improve upon them in like really obvious and meaningful ways. The downsides, I don't know if I share some of the same downsides as a lot of people. Monotonous, I don't think that they had a great enemy diversity. I don't think the puzzle diversity was compelling either. Even though the full game play start to finish for the campaign was like 40 hours for me, I didn't 100% the game, but I also did my best to go out of my way to explore and get secrets and stuff. In that 40 hours, it's like, it felt like there was maybe only like 10, 15 or 20 hours of unique gameplay, and most of the other 30 hours, 20 to 30 hours, was a rehashing of some of the same ideas. There are like, I don't know, like fewer than 10 enemy types probably. I am not super compelled by the diverse like beast capturing you can do. There are like all sorts of beasts you can capture and breed and stuff, and I'm not super into that, and so the diversity that they brought to the table with that aspect of the game didn't really speak to me. And then the second complaint is maybe not something that affected me so much, but again, it's something that I heard a lot of other people complain about, was the game didn't really respect your choices in the universe very well. The way I understand it is that if you played through the game multiple times and made vastly different decisions in how you interacted with characters and the order you did things in and where you went and choices you made, none of it would impact pretty much anything. It wouldn't impact the paths available to you in the world, or the quests available to you, ending of those quests, or even the main story. The main story ends up, I think, pretty much the same as well. And so some people wish that the game had been a little bit more dynamic. It didn't bother me so much, especially because I don't intend to play the game multiple times. But I do think that is a downside. I do think if one of my favorite developers of games, From Software, who makes the Souls series, they've made Elden Ring recently. One of the best things about those games is the dynamic nature of what you choose to do in the game, I guess, affects things. Like, it affects things in your quest endings and in the items available to you and things like that. So I think it's a good thing to include in your game, and to aggressively make your game aggressively static where everything will be the same every time, I think is probably a little bit of a downside. This is ranked 29 as well. I think Balatro was also ranked 29, so they were tied. I decided not to break the tie. But I didn't necessarily expect Hogwarts Legacy to be as good as it was, because I heard a lot of people hating on it, and I think it was actually like totally fine. Very good, even. There's like this weird complaint where it's like it could have been so much better. I think is where a lot of these voices are coming from, where it's like it could have been so much better. And I don't know, like every game could be better, or could be more to your liking. That's not really the point of the experience. And I think the experience of Hogwarts Legacy was wonderful to me in many ways. I don't even recognize the soundtrack that we're listening to right now, but apparently this is the soundtrack from Sifu. This was not in my Steam recap because I played this on my PlayStation, and I played it at the same time with a buddy of mine. We kind of played it together cooperatively. It's a single player game, but we played it on the hardest difficulty, which just made it extremely hard. We died a lot, so we just got to trade back and forth playing it over and over and over. There's not tons of content, although I do really like the challenges that they add beyond the main story of the game. They have like these little challenge modes where you have to try and complete certain combats with special conditions or whatever. I think that's great. We haven't finished exploring all of that. I don't know if we will. But outside of that, the game's pretty short. Despite that, we got a ton of mileage out of just grinding away at the game, and I think that's because of these two pros right here. The combat was great, and then the challenge was compelling. It was meaningful. It felt extremely engaging. I mean, I love challenging games more than most, and so it's easy for me to just list that as a pro. But I do really feel that besides just making a very difficult game, they did it in a way that is going to draw you in. I had question marks here on the cons list for a couple of reasons. I think the main reason is just to remind me to point out to you all at this point in the game. Oops, spoilers. Sorry, you see what's next. To point out to you all in this point in the presentation that we are now in my top 4. This is number 4, the number 4 game I played this year. My number 25 game overall. I mentioned that top 25 is kind of an important threshold for me and my gaming friends, and this met that threshold. And so the question marks are here to remind me to point out to you all that we're getting to the point where there aren't a lot of downsides. Some of these games are extremely excellent because specifically there's just like nothing bad to say about them. For me anyway. And so I have very little bad to say about Sifu. I think the art style is good, and it was a choice that they made. It's not beautiful though. It's not beautiful in the way an indie game is going to do like a cutesy hand-drawn art style like Cobalt Core or Hollow Knight, but it's also not beautiful in the way a huge game developer is going to make the graphics on their game, like God of War or Hogwarts Legacy. They chose an art style that worked for the engine that they were going to build the game in and the budget that they had, and it's an art style that they committed to that I think lends itself well to the combat, but ultimately is not beautiful. There's also you might have noticed by my comment on not recognizing the music we were listening to just a moment ago, there's also not any track that stood out to me musically. So I don't think that they had an impressive composition or score for the video game. So those are kind of downsides, but especially with the visual one, it's weird to even call it a downside because I think I probably stand by the decision making. Again, it's like the downsides aren't here to say that the developers did something wrong or could have done something better. It's just they decide to build a game that is not delivering in its artistic impressiveness. It's just giving you great combat and great challenge. The other con I put here, and I don't even know if this is a legitimate complaint because I haven't played that many fighting games. Sifu is a fighting game, but it's not even really, as far as I understand it, talking to other people, it's not even a pure combat game in the way some combat games are with like button combos, where it's like extremely intensive, the memorization you have to do and the execution you have to do for specific combats, or for specific movesets and stuff in combat, basically. So I don't know if this is actually them doing something weird or bad, but my feeling was that, what is this song? I'm trying to jump ahead to some music that is not as annoying to me. I'm just gonna turn the music off for now. I don't like the Sifu soundtrack, it seems. I haven't listened to it a ton, but having it just play in the background while I'm trying to do my little description here for you is driving me crazy, so I guess that doesn't bode well for the soundtrack. Anyway, but back to my point about the button layout. Basically my complaint here is there were some combos that seemed extremely useful that were reliant on like a weird combination of inputs, like pulling back on the left thumbstick and then pushing forward on the left thumbstick at the same time you press the X button. Like, what's that about? I feel like I would have liked it if there was more compelling, like XXYX does this and XXXY does this. They had a little bit of that, but it felt mostly unimportant. And I feel like if they had made, or maybe I just didn't figure out the game well enough, I don't know. But just the fact that I knew there were some button inputs that were very cumbersome that seemed really important also, just kind of was annoying for a game that was supposed to be about great combat. Anyway, overall, this game ended up number 25 for me. I don't need to give you a long intro for the music on the next game for you to see if you can recognize what it's from. You all already saw my little spoiler here. The next game on our list, my number 3 game I played this year, is Lies of P. Once again, I think I played this at the very end of last year, but I think I did technically finish it this year. Or at least I played a little bit of this year, so at the beginning of the year. I don't know if I was finishing it. I do remember I eventually decided to start a new run, and then didn't get very far because the new run was not exciting me. But regardless, I put it on the list for the games I played that were new to me in 2024, even though it seems it may have overlapped a little bit with 2023. But that's okay, it's not like I made a video for this in 2023, so really I could put any game on here I wanted to and no one would know whether or not I played it this year or last year. But I played this enough of this year that's on the list. It's number 3. Okay, the pros. Why is it in the top 3? Similar to Sifu, satisfying combat, although it's satisfying combat in a very different way. It's like, I don't even know what to call the genre of combat, but it's more like a Souls-like. It's very difficult boss fights, and very... this game had a deflect mechanic like Sekiro. Sekiro is my second favorite game of all time, and Lies of P implemented the deflect mechanic that rivals the excellency of Sekiro's deflect mechanic, which automatically just means it's a fantastic game, as long as they don't fumble the other things. I think in some ways they really did try to fumble the other things, and we'll talk about that in a moment when we get to the cons. But talking about the other pro, the intriguing world, I liked the premise. I liked the characters. And I'll even say I liked the world building. I don't know if I necessarily liked the environments, but the conflict introduced in the world was quirky, and I don't know if fresh is the right word because there's definitely some overdone nature to the idea of like corruption taking over the land and a sickness that people don't know about. There's a little bit of like zombie element to it, which is definitely not fresh. But this idea that we have our main character that's a puppet that is becoming more human by doing more human things, and the human things that they give you in the game to do are things like listening to a song like this that we're listening to right now. That was very intriguing to me. It was excellent. I liked the idea that there is humanity in the art that they made. Like in universe, like there's humanity in like listening to music, but like out of universe, like in a meta sense, like there's humanity to me playing this video game that has composed for me this beautiful music and designed for me this beautiful world. And I do think the art style was good. It seemed like really high fidelity. They went for like realistic, high graphic quality, and I think it worked. I think they did a good job. The downsides actually were like kind of big downsides. This game, like unlike Sifu, I guess, where I was like, I don't know if there are even, when we get to these really good games, there just like really aren't that many downsides. I think this game did a lot of things that were like way better than a game like Sifu, and way worse than any of the mistakes that Sifu made, if we could even say that Sifu made any mistakes. The first one is level design. I felt like the navigating the world was not fun, I guess. I don't know, like going through the hall. It's supposed to be a Souls-like, and it's hard to have as good of level design as Dark Souls, apparently. People say it's the best ever. And I feel like that kind of showed through with Lies of P, where it was just like kind of like, at best, it was forgettable to just navigate through the buildings and city. Yeah, the city is like designed very linearly, so that's another thing very different from Dark Souls is you don't really backtrack so much. You just kind of like linearly weave your way from one part of the city supposedly to another. By the way, like the geography of the campaign of this video game and the story navigates itself in a way that like totally does not hold up spatially. Like the geography, I think, is totally whack. But they hide it because it's not open world. You can't actually like test the geographic integrity of the game. It just is kind of hidden from you. But even within one region on its own, I feel like the level design was a little bit lackluster, where you're like, I don't know, you go around, climb up ladders, and open up shortcuts, and just weave your way through to the next objective until you stumble upon it. It didn't feel great. And then the other complaint here, which is like a weirdly important complaint to me, is that I feel like the worst stuff of the game is in the second half of the game. Like the worst region of the game is the very last region of the game. The best boss fight is exactly halfway through the game. I would say the best boss fight is the one that's halfway through the game, and so it sucks that there's a really great boss fight like 80% of the way through the game. I don't think it's the best. It might be the best. It's close. But there's like this 50% of the way through boss and this 80% of the way through boss that are just excellent and the best. And then all the other stuff in the second half of the game, the bosses were like worse generally than the ones earlier on. The world was less fun to navigate in the back half of the game. And just designing the experience that way is kind of a bummer. It's hard to really appreciate the high tier work that the game achieved at the beginning when they just end on the worst notes. I don't mean to talk it up too much. I feel like these worst notes like weren't that bad, but I think it's worth pointing out that the game was anticlimactic in the order that they put forth the quality of the stuff they did. Alright, what's next? Oh yeah, this one. I have to give it a moment to play for a second. By the way, I have no idea what's going to happen like with copyright stuff. My understanding is that because this is commentary, that there is not overt copyright infringement, but certainly like YouTube flags any music that they can recognize and can order a takedown. So hopefully that doesn't happen to me, but if it does, oh well. This was my second favorite game I played this year, and either the second most hours or the most hours. Balatro was ahead by a little bit, but I have played more Ravenswatch in the last few weeks, and so I think Ravenswatch may have taken the cake on the most hours I put in to a video game in 2024, on Steam, that is. Ravenswatch is a cooperative combat roguelike, and I loved it. It was great. Also, let me check, what's the recording at? It's at, oh, we're not quite at an hour. That'll be good. I'll wrap up within the hour, so I got 9 minutes to finish up here. What was good about Ravenswatch was the co-op. I think was probably the best part. I played this with friends that like roguelikes well enough, and we just kind of really got into it together, challenging each other to get better and to get very completionist with it, and the excitement really compounded because of the cooperative nature, I think, in a way that Helldivers just didn't reach. So, you know, well done Ravenswatch for the best co-op of the year. And then the other pro is kind of a, I guess, a Slay the Spire type of compliment, where the design is excellent. I feel like it's actually extremely well balanced. I loved, there are 9 characters available right now, and I think all of them are extremely well designed in their abilities and balance. And I think the enemies in each chapter are extremely well designed in their movesets and the balance of the game. Super impressive. One of the downsides is I put scope here. This is because the game is still being worked on, so there's some content updates that they're planning on doing. Eventually they're going to have more characters, they're introducing more mini-bosses, and I think that's great, but also I can't help but put it on my list of complaints where it's like, well, I feel like they wisely see that there should be more content here, and right now there's not more content here. So that for the time being is a downside. I don't super mind it coming out slowly. There are some games where I've been especially frustrated with how slowly they release the content for. Rogue Legacy 2 is an example of that, where I'm like, geez, I would rather you just wait until the game was done and give it to me than slowly give me step by step. But I think there are very key differences in what Ravenswatch is missing and what Rogue Legacy 2 was missing, and so this is not a major downside. Also, this is my top 16 game of all time now after playing it this year, so it makes sense that these are not major downsides. Like, this is a great game, and I don't have a lot of complaints. But my other complaint here is similar to Sifu. I don't think that the art is especially beautiful, and I don't think that the music is especially memorable. This ended up being my number 16 game overall, and the number 2 game I played in 2024 that was new to me. And finally, number 1, and we gotta kind of get through this quickly and give you our wrap, but my number 1 game I played this year in 2024 ends up being my number, well, I guess I won't spoil it for you yet, what number game it is overall for me. But the game is Nine Souls. This is a Metroidvania. I think it technically has the Souls-like tag, although a lot of people are super gatekeepy about what counts as a Souls-like. And they might not count this as a Souls-like, but it's centered around very difficult boss fights and very tight combat mechanics, and so in that way it does resemble Souls games, but really it's a lot like Hollow Knight. Some people say it's like Hollow Knight and Sekiro combined, because there is a deflect mechanic that's extremely satisfying, extremely well designed, like that of Sekiro. By the way, Hollow Knight and Sekiro are my two favorite games of all time, so it's no surprise that a game that decided to combine a lot of the major elements of those two games ended up being very good overall. I decided to just put a huge list of pros because I love this game. This is the last game I played this year, and what a way to end the year. This game was beautiful. I loved the art, hand-drawn art style, similar to the hand-drawn art style of Hollow Knight, although it's very much its own, very unique, and I loved looking at it. I loved listening to it. I don't think the music was on the tier of Hollow Knight. In fact, maybe that should have been one of the cons as well. I put a question mark next to cons there because I really did not have a lot of complaints about the game. But certainly I feel like the soundtrack was not inspiring. It was challenging. I loved the difficulty and the dance it taught you as you got good at different regions and boss fights. I don't want to listen to that part of the soundtrack, so I'll just go ahead and pause it here. Wrap up the video with without the music accompaniment. But the combat was excellent. I loved the defensive options. I loved the attack options. The exploration and the Metroidvania elements were excellent. I loved unlocking new abilities to unlock new areas to figure out more of the world. Understand more of the story. I thought the narrative was compelling and interesting. It was very thought-provoking. I loved the characters in the enemies that you end up fighting. The atmosphere had a very well communicated sense of atmosphere and mood for the game. Lots of great things to say about this game. The downside would just be that I wish I had more. The more, the better. And it's not even a huge downside because I did remark to one of my friends that I was actually impressed with, as short as the game was, how much excellent content they packed into every minute of gameplay. In both a narrative element, a gameplay mechanic element like the combat itself, and an exploration element with the Metroidvania stuff. It just all worked. And they were extremely efficient, even though they didn't give me like a 40-hour video game. I think specifically it took me like 21 hours to beat. So yeah, this ended up being my number 4 game of all time. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, you are amazing. Thank you. And consider subscribing. Consider watching another video on my channel. Comment. Let me know if you like the review type of content or if you prefer just watching casual playthroughs of games that I happen to be playing through. If I get a lot of positive feedback on this review type of content, I would love to do more of this, write more scripts and do really deep dives and be a little bit more experimental with the game content that I show as I talk about a specific video game. I could see myself really getting into that element. But it is a lot more work, which means it would be fewer videos and less justifiable unless it felt like it was something that people really wanted from my channel, which remains to be seen. So let me know in the comments. Hit the like button, and hopefully I see you next time.